This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Zach Worton. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, and on this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Zach Worton. His book, The Search for Charley Butters, came out just recently from Conundrum Press. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Now, sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that go higher than that. And this month, you'll find a variety of specials on both single issues and on bundles. And as we like to point out on the Comics Alternative, one of the best ways of getting your comics through DCB service is bundled. You can find great discounts on bundles from such publishers as Aftershock, DC, Vertigo, and Marvel. You can't go wrong with Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. Zach Worton's book, The Search for Charley Butters, was released just recently from Conundrum Press. And in fact, this is the second of a trilogy surrounding the character of Charley Butters. Last year, we saw the publication of The Disappearance of Charley Butters. Now it's The Search for Charley Butters, and as Zach will tell us in a moment, next year we can expect The Death of Charley Butters. I have a great time talking with him about this trilogy, as well as his previous book, The Klondike, that came out in 2011. So I want to let you listen to that conversation right now. I'm pleased to have on the Comics Alternative Zach Worton. His latest book from Conundrum Press is The Search for Charley Butters, and that came out last month. Zach, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get started with your most recent work, The Search for Charley Butters, or I guess in the larger sense, your Charley Butters series. Mm-hmm. So for those who have not had the pleasure of reading either of those books yet, because The Disappearance of Charley Butters came out last year, how would you set up this series?
It's a black comedy about isolation and mental instability. That's the best way I can describe it. Failing friendships, addiction. So it's all, it's a black comedy about depression, basically.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, when we talked about The Disappearance of Charley Butters last year, when this came out, we did a publisher spotlight a little more than a year ago, I think, on the seasonal releases from Conundrum, and The Disappearance of Charley Butters was one of those books. And I remember commenting that before I picked it up, I had assumed that this was a done-in-one.
Right.
And then I got to the end and I thought, okay, this is part of a series because it's obvious that the story needs to go on. Plus, you include at the very end of that book, coming soon, The Search for Charley Butters.
Right.
And so now we have this year that book, and we see that the next one is going to be The Death of Charley Butters. So is that going to be coming out next year?
Yeah, but not till, I think, fall. Fall of 2017.
Okay.
I need a little bit of a breather. Though I do love this story. I spent, the better part of the last year just doing that. And, being able to go outside once in a while would be nice.
Yeah, you don't want to go into seclusion like Charley Butters.
No, I did that this last year, and it made me kind of go crazy a little bit.
Did you go in the woods?
No, I just in my apartment, in the studio in my apartment.
Yeah. Well, for those who may not be getting our references, what happens in the first book, The Disappearance of Charley Butters, is that Travis, who's our protagonist, and several of his friends, Mike Randall and Stuart, we see them going into a heavily wooded area. They're going to shoot kind of a makeshift music video. They have a black metal band. And then while they're on location, they come across this old rundown shack in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods. And so they go in and discover that there are a series of diaries there. Travis is intrigued by them, and he's intrigued enough to where he goes back and gets them. And they're diaries from a painter that, I believe, in the 1950s?
Yeah, late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, he left his home life to kind of go out in the woods, and there's a big question mark as to exactly why he did this, and this is one of the things that drives Travis. And so this is the setup, and these are the two storylines that are going on with the Charley Butters books. The story of Travis and his relationship with not only his friends, but also this mysterious figure, Charley Butters, and then the story of Charley Butters that we get through the diaries.
Right.
Yeah. Now, where did the idea for Charley Butters, the series, come from?
Well, I was still living in Montreal, working on the Klondike, and I was kind of taking a break because it took 5 years to do that book. So I was looking at YouTube one day, and I had remembered that I had friends who were into black metal and stuff like that, so I was just watching some music videos because they're all pretty terrible. The one in the book is actually, I basically paused a video by this band called Immortal, called Call of the Winter Moon, and if you ever have a chance to see it, it's pretty ridiculous. And it's, I've actually paused the video so basically, they've recreated this video. So I was just, I was kind of having this idea. It didn't turn into anything, and I let it sit for about, I don't know, a year or so. I didn't have much more of a story, and at the same time I was thinking about doing a book on Tom Thompson, so I kind of just, and his disappearance, so I kind of just married the two things together, and it just clicked one day as to what I wanted to do with it. And the video was a good jump off point.
Because
that's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, and that the shooting of the video, I mean, not only does it help set up the connection between Travis and Charley Butters, but also, and I think more importantly, you get to see Travis and his relationship with the people around him.
Right, exactly. And if in the second part you find out just how because at the end of the first book, there was the disastrous start to the documentary that Travis totally muffs up. You get to see more of the relationship between him and Stuart as well, which is, obviously from the beginning kind of a strained relationship.
It's interesting, in going back to reread the first book from last year, The Disappearance of Charley Butters, I was reminded of a big question mark I had when I first picked that up last year. It's like, who is the biggest asshole so far? When the story begins, is it Travis or is it Mike Or is it Stewart? I really don't think anyone could see Randall as that bad.
No,
because
he's kind of
he's a peacemaker.
He is. Though he is, sort of stoic at at all times. It seems like, he's kind of the level head, in between the two powerful personalities, or three powerful personalities.
Yeah, because I think the first character that grumbles is actually Travis. He's complaining, and Mike and the others are telling him, "Would you get off of it? Would you stop it? Just go along. This is going to be fun. We're supposed to have a good time here." But then it turns out that he's the one who becomes the main character, and the one that is, I guess, the most complex, we have the most access to, so we're more apt to identify with. Mm-hmm. And then you had mentioned the direction that you take things in this new book that just came out, The Search for Charley Butters. Right. And it is all about Travis's, I don't know if you want to call it descent, or maybe we could. I mean, do you see this as a descent for him?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't want to give anything away in the third book, but there's, he doesn't have a good time. He doesn't have a good time of it. Everything kind of falls apart for him in the search, and he does not handle it well in the months to come.
Wow, so that's in the third book. I thought that things were falling apart for him in this latest book.
Well, I mean, it doesn't get any better. He doesn't, I don't want to say anything else.
Okay, yeah. So how many books do you have planned for this series?
It is 3. It is 3 books.
Oh, so...
Though, I mean, I could, if anyone cared, like if anyone was actually buying and reading this, then I could, I have ideas to keep going with it. It didn't turn out that way, and initially it was like, this is one book, and then Andy was like, maybe...
Andy Brown.
Yeah.
Publisher
suggested
of the Conundrum.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, my publisher, yes. Suggested that maybe, you consider doing more than one. And I, got back to him immediately and said, I have ideas for, this thing to continue. So it's worked out. I don't know. I don't know how well it's doing, but, I certainly enjoy doing it. I like it's, it's something that I would want to read. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? If you're not doing comics for yourself, you can't think about who's going to be reading them, I don't think. Mm-hmm. You got to make yourself happy with the stories that you want to tell.
Well, actually, you've answered a question that I had, and that was, at what point did you decide to turn this into a series instead of just one longer book? So you're saying that you had a plan for one, and then Andy Brown suggested that you take the story further.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you know at that point that you wanted to break things into 3 different volumes?
Yeah, I kind of had the idea of, while I was finishing up the disappearance, that I wanted there to be a search and a death of. Though I did not propose that when Andy agreed to publish it. It was kind of just something in the back of my mind. That it's worked out. Mm-hmm.
And so you're doing roughly about publishing one book in this Charley Butters series a year. Now, this is a very different strategy from your earlier book, which you referenced a moment ago, and that's The Klondike, which is, yes, it's a completely different kind of story, but it's much longer, and you did a lot of research for that.
I did, yeah. I think there was like 35 books in the bibliography. I was researching and writing the entire time I was working on the book, changing stuff, taking stuff out, putting stuff in. That was a real learning experience, working on something like that.
Well, for those who
That was a tough one.
yeah, and for those who aren't familiar, this book, The Klondike, came out from Drawn and Quarterly in 2011, and it is a historical narrative. And basically, all the research that you were doing, you were reading a variety of different texts on the Yukon Gold Rush.
Right.
During the, I guess, late 19th and into the early 20th century. And
right.
So in comics form, you're telling that story kind of episodically.
Exactly, yeah. And it all kind of takes place. I mean, the Gold Rush didn't last for long at all. I mean, that was only like the Klondike could have been a lot longer. I think I took out 150 or so pages. Originally, it was like a 450-page book. But, you know, there was stuff in there that I realized I didn't want. Like, I didn't want it to be... I wanted it to be like a historical narrative. I didn't want it to be... I wanted it to be dry. I didn't want it to be too... Like, I didn't want the comedy. There was a few characters in there in the Gold Rush that were sort of like would have been viewed as like buffoons or whatever. But I kind of tried to keep it serious, and I don't know if that necessarily did a service to the book or not, but that's what I came out with.
It's interesting that you mentioned that in the original work there was maybe a little bit of comedy in terms of some of the characters. And by the way, I mean, this is a very character-driven story. But as you point out, I mean, these are all historically based. And you even have 4 pages in the back of the Klondike where you give brief bios of the main players of your story, which I found very helpful when I originally read this, because I remember trying to get straight who was who. This was really helpful.
I had to... When I was pretty much done the book, Chris Olivero sent me an email saying, can you change the way this character looks? He looks too much like this person. So then I had to go through the entire book to redesign the character. I had to go back through the whole thing with vellum overlay, redraw like the head of the character and place it on there. And then they had to rescan those, drop it back into the book. So it was on all ends, it was a very labor intensive project.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the characters from this time have these big heavy mustaches or beards or Van Dykes, and so it's easy to get them mixed up in terms of the coverage of facial hair.
Sure, yeah. If you look at photographs of the time, it's hard to tell anyone apart.
Yeah. You mentioned the slight comedy. The one place that I think it kind of came out in the finished book was through the character Big Alex McDonald. Because
yeah, that's right.
The way you draw him, he seems... Well, you describe in the bio at the back that he was seen as a little slow, and he does have this kind of droopy, lethargic look. Yeah,
well, that was... Yeah. I kind of played that up a little bit just because, you gotta... They're all caricatures of who they really were. So I decided to make him kind of look like a dope a little bit. Even though he was a shrewd businessman. He owned half of Dawson at the time.
Yeah. But yeah, I am glad that you, I guess, resisted the urge to include or to leave in the comedy, because if you had a kind of a Gabby Hayes type of character in the Klondike, it may have taken away from the seriousness of your text.
Yeah, there's there's a person who was sort of like a main player in that I left out. His name was Swiftwater Bill, and he was, just like this weird, eccentric, oddball. Kind of like a womanizer, but just like always get, when I think of him, I think of, pratfalls. So I was like, I didn't want to do that.
And what was his name? Swiftwater
Bill.
Okay. Let me ask you, is something of Swiftwater Bill at the very end of the book on the how to pan instructions in the back? Because there's this character, there's
he
this
wasn't
gold miner.
Yes, no, that was my Gabby Hayes.
Okay, yeah.
But Swiftwater Bill was like a dapper
Oh, I see.
guy who's kind of like he was kind of like a more cartoonish, less sinister E.B. Farnham. I mean, if that's from Deadwood, if that's the one comparison that I could make, he was kind of always, from what I've read about him, he was kind of always strutting around. Nothing ever really worked out for him. He was just kind of a well-dressed loser.
Okay, so why, for your very first long-form comic, did you choose a very research-heavy historical narrative?
I'm friends with Peter, who owns and runs the Beguiling, and I was in there one day, and I didn't know what to work on next. I had kind of given up on this comic that I was working on. So he said, here, he was, always trying to give me, because, Chester did so well with Louis Riel. Maybe he suggested, Canadian history might be the way to go. It's worked out for Chester. So he lent me a couple of books, and he gave me a copy of Pierre Burton's Klondike. And it was just, it changed everything. I fell in love with the time period and the stories. But in hindsight, I have no idea what I was thinking. I did not know what I was getting into when I started that. Though I'm glad I did it. And first book I'm drawing quarterly. How could you feel bad about that?
I know. Well, it's interesting that you mention Chester Brown and Louis Riel, because we talked with him not too long ago on the Comics Alternative about his latest book. And at one point he had mentioned that after he completed Louis Riel, he felt that he was, by many of his readers, kind of typecast. In other words, he was the one to go to if you needed a cartoon history of something Canadian.
Right,
and so he felt that he needed to kind of leave that behind after that long narrative of Louis Riel. And I'm wondering if you had similar things going on after the Klondike.
I did. I got approached by a couple different people about doing various, late 1800s related projects. There was someone wanted me to do something in some film that they were doing. But they wanted me to work for free.
Oh gosh.
So I was just like, no thanks. But yeah, I mean, after that, it was so long too. Like, it took so long to do, and I was so tired mentally by the end of it, because, 5 years on, and, I redrew the first 40 or so pages of the book once I got to the end. So once I was actually finished the book, I started redrawing it. I just did little tiny things, and I think I left it too long between books. 4 years was, I think, way too long. But I was, basically just doing little horror comics. Horror is, sort of what my outside of comics, even though I'm kind of working on something horror-y right now, where my true love lies, as far as, stories go in movies or books or whatever. So I did a little thing with Patrick Kyle and Michael DeForge and Chris Kuzma called Horrible, and it was a little horror anthology that we did. Then I put out another comic called Now You Die that I just self-published. Then I started a series with Chuck Forsman's Oily Comics that I have yet to finish. I've only put 3 parts out, and that was several years ago. So I kind of had to, you know, people wanted me to do stuff with the Canadian history, and I just couldn't do it. I had to move along. I had to move along, and eventually I want to go back and do it. I wanted to do it. Originally, I wanted to do a trilogy of books that were all based on things that happened in the country's history or whatever, but it has yet to happen so far.
Now, you had mentioned that there were a number of collaborations that you did after the Klondike, but there was nonetheless that spread between books, right? The Klondike came out in 2011, and then The Disappearance of Charley Butters in 2015. Do you think that just the sheer amount of work you had to put into the Klondike, the research and everything, kind of explained in many ways why you didn't get the next book out sooner rather than later? Were you just I don't know, re-energizing your batteries, taking a break?
I guess so. I mean, I was, really mentally exhausted after that. And looking back, I feel like I was out of the game too long, a little bit. But I think, it's good. I have a lot of things on the go now. So I'm not sorry it happened that way. Even if I did get, even though I feel like maybe people forgot a little bit, which happens,
Well, I recall that my first introduction to you was actually the Klondike. I got that book when it first came out, and I don't want to say that I forgot, but as you'd mentioned, that people may not remember. So when I saw the solicit for The Disappearance of Charley Butters, I didn't, and I saw the name, I didn't put it directly, or at least immediately, to the Klondike.
Right, exactly.
But then when I looked at the art, that's when it hit me. It's like, of course, because you have a very distinct style,
which I think is is not popular now, and I'm not saying that is a bad thing. It's just there are certain cartoonists who have sort of changed the landscape of what's popular.
That's interesting. So you feel that something a little more stylized or something distinct is not as popular as more of a consistent style? And is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that because, I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to say that there's anything wrong with it either. But there are certain cartoonists out there who have changed what people want to see, the way that they have drawn, and there's copycats out there, which is great. It's it's good, but I don't think I've ever had a style that's entirely popular that people really love. It's kind of always been weird a little bit, but not like normal weird. It's sort of like European weird. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, who were some of the artists who you feel inspired you or affected you to where you have the style that you do today?
You may find this is, 100% true, though it may not be obvious. Katsuhiro Otomo is one of my all-time favorites. Jack Davis. Hands are, largely due to my love of Jack Davis. It's my homage to Jack Davis. Who else? Mike Mignola is a huge, even though it doesn't look like that at all. He's a huge influence. He was, Peter Bagg, Dan Clowes. So I have a run. I don't know where this came out, because there's no real similarities with any of them.
Although
Aside from the hands, I think with Jack Davis, I think it's all pretty much, not, you wouldn't be able to tell any of those people influenced me, I think, anyways, by looking at the way that I draw.
Right, but all this still makes sense to me because one of the things you mentioned about all of those artists is that, they themselves have a distinct style, right?
Right.
And so, for instance, a Klaus or a Bag, you look at that and you know, oh, it's Klaus or it's Peter Bag.
Right.
You can't mistake that. And that's what I get from your art as well.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very nice. Yeah, it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing where popularity comes into it, into comics, into art, into music, into any of that kind of thing. It's like you think that if something is well crafted, that it's going to be popular, but it's not. It's all about personal taste, and if something is weird or off-putting about it, a large amount of the people, I feel like, regardless of whether or not it's good, is going to turn someone off.
Right. Yeah. And, I like you mentioned, I have nothing against a style, that is popular, that is used maybe with various degrees of differences to tell other kind of stories. But if you kind of step back and you look at a lot of these stories from a distance, the art seems to look the same. And for me, I'm less apt to pick up an individual title and try it because I look at the art and I think, oh, well, this is very similar to this and that.
I'm the same way. The same way. Yeah.
And, I was thinking, I don't know why this example popped into my head, but a lot of the stuff over the past few years that's been coming out of Boom Studios, let's say for younger readers. So it could be Boombox, or it could be Kaboom, or just Boom proper. And I like a lot of that stuff, but if I don't, if I don't delve deeply into the stories, I may not see the apparent differences between, let's say, Steven Universe and Lumberjanes, right? I see an art or Puppy Cat, right? Bee and Puppy Cat. I think that's the other title. I'm probably getting that wrong. But I see the style and I think, okay, these all have something in common. Where do I start? I don't know. So I'm going to be less apt to pick up a title.
Right. Yeah.
That's not fair, but that's just a feeling I get.
Yeah. I get it. I do. I get it. And because there are, cartoonists who have influenced an entire sort of like generation almost of like indie cartoonists, I can see, like, if I'm picking up someone else's work who has a similar style, it's like, well, this is well done, but, this just looks like this other cartoonist. So why, and you're dismissive of it a little bit. And it isn't fair. It isn't fair, but, that's just, I feel like there's, maybe too much overt sort of like, copying going on. I don't know.
Like if a particular all-age title in terms of its art and its appeal is successful, let's say with DC, then you can expect to see future titles that have a similar look, or the same with Marvel.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And you're going, like you were saying, you're less apt to give it a shot. It's a strange thing. It's also a strange thing to do that, I think, a little bit. To be so overtly influenced to the point where you're just trying to draw like this other person.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the mainstream, at least for me, one of the things that's going to get me to consider a title or to pick up an issue is going to be an artist that is outside of, let's say, the mainstream look, and someone whose style is quite distinct. And I'm thinking of a really good example, at least for me, is Sonny Liu becoming the artist last year on Dr. Fate.
Yeah, I'm not sure who that is, or you know, I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah,
but like Marcos Martin or someone like that, working on a
good
title,
example.
it's like, that guy is great. Mm-hmm. That guy can draw. That guy's got such a great style that kind of fits in the Marvel universe back in the 50s or 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's great. You don't see that very often these days in a mainstream comic.
Right. So let's get back to the most recent book, The Search for Charley Butters. And, if there was kind of darkness and depression on the horizon in the disappearance of Charley Butters, then we confronted directly in this new book. And The Search for Charley Butters seems to me kind of a series of ups and downs for Travis, especially when it comes to his drinking problem.
Right.
And that seems to, again, kind of define what this installment is mostly about. Because when we pick up the story, it's 1 year later from where the disappearance of Charley Butters left off.
Right.
And Stewart has taken it upon himself to make this documentary on Charley Butters by himself. And I really appreciate in this new book how you didn't feel the need to pick up exactly where you left off from the first one. And we get hints of what might have happened with Travis and his friends and his relationships throughout. So for instance, we don't know exactly what it was that caused the split between Travis and Stewart, although that unsuccessful interview with Butters' wife as probably one indication. But then what happened to the relationship between Travis and Kat?
Well, I mean, it kind of gets touched on a little bit, and there will be there'll be a resolution in the third part. But, when he's talking to Randall at the end, he kind of gives away a little bit of it, but you can, it's obviously still painful for him. So he decides, just to be, really light on the details. But, all of what you were just talking about is basically his obsession with Charley Butters, his obsession with not being on the documentary, getting kicked off the documentary, his friendship with Mike, his growing drinking problem. It was just all those things that any sane person would say, all right, well, I love you, but this just isn't working anymore. You're not, the person that I started dating. So I think it was just sort of like the, sort of typical kind of you're an alcoholic asshole, I'm out of here.
Yeah. But I mean, I appreciate the fact that you didn't feel the need to really explain all of that. I mean, there are a lot of little hints there that we as readers can kind of assume or fill in some gaps. And I think that's a much more powerful way of manner of telling the story.
Yeah, I didn't feel the need to, and plus it adds to the whole, mystery, whatever that means. But I didn't want it to be just there and ready and explained for you. I don't appreciate that as a reader, to be just handed all of the details necessarily. Mm-hmm. I like to try and figure things out. I like to be given the opportunity to, come to my own conclusions sometimes, to think about it, to let it, sort of ponder. So that's kind of what I wanted to do.
Well, one of the really big mysteries in this story is, why is Travis so drawn to the story of Charley Butters? I mean, what is it about Charley Butters that is completely, at times, consuming Travis?
He can't figure it out. He just can't figure out what it is. About Charley Butters' mental state and why he left. He also can't figure out why he is so obsessed with it. So there's just questions in him that he can't answer. That he's, there's no way to get answers to. Because even if he went back and talked to the wife, she doesn't know. She didn't even know that he was living in the woods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think just curiosity. Basic old run-of-the-mill curiosity, questions not answered. That's what's driven him to where he is now.
Yeah, and in fact, in some ways, I don't know if this is too grandiose a comparison, but Travis is like and I think the character's name is Thompson, the reporter in Citizen Kane, right? He's trying to figure out what is it about Charles Foster Kane that is so moving, that draws so many people. And then, the very end, when he makes that comment that, maybe a person's life is not just a collection of little pieces of a puzzle that once you put them together, then explains it all. I mean, maybe there's something just enigmatic about how a person defines himself or what draws people to him or her. You can't know anyone.
No, it's true. You're not that far off of if that was on my mind. Yes,
Citizen Kane was.
Yeah, a little bit.
So we're going to see a sled in the death of Charley Butters?
I reveal nothing.
Okay, so we have something to look forward to for next year.
Yeah.
So you are still in the process of finishing up the death of Charley Butters?
I am I'm writing it right now. I'm also working on something that is going to come out a little later this year. That I'm just putting out myself for now. It is that horror-y kind of comic that I was briefly talking about before. So, yeah, I'm doing that. Going to get that out for just before Halloween, and then I'm going to start drawing the next Charley Butters chapter.
So is this new horror work that'll come out in around, I guess, October, is this going to be a one-shot? Will it be coming out through Conundrum?
I don't know. I'm getting it together. I have another publisher that's also interested in it. So there is. I want to send it out to a few people and see what happens. It's definitely different from, the Charley Butters. It's way different from the Charley Butters and the Klondike. I've been posting stuff from it on my social media, just like bits and pieces. It's called The Weird World of Legula Gardner.
Oh, that's what this is, because I was going to ask you about what that was.
Yeah, so I'm working on that right now. It's all about my love of trashy horror movies. Are you familiar with Something Weird Video? They put out they just reissue like crazy old exploitation horror, sci-fi, like body stuff. So it's basically my love letter to trash culture. Tiki, garage music, surf, and it's stuff that it's just fun for me to do.
Will this be a longer narrative, or is this like, for instance, that you could see serializing, or is this just a done in one?
I'm serializing it. It's I'm doing it like the old like comic magazines, kind of where it's like a big, like I want it to be a larger format because I'm back to drawing on super big paper for this. So I'm doing a bunch of like fake ads to put in it for like fake products and fake, but also like there's bands in it. Like the first issue has the band that I'm in it, and every issue the band will be killed horribly. But then there'll be an ad in the back for like a real ad for whatever band is in its like a release or whatever, like album or whatever, and information on how to get it. So it's just fun. It's kind of gory. It's fun. It's just fun.
So you mentioned the larger format. Is this, I mean, do you envision this being something like, the classic horror magazines, like eerie and creepy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but I mean, it's only going to just be the one story, so it's not going to be like an anthology kind of thing. But yeah, so that's exactly. It was kind of like that, and the Crickets format has inspired me also. So I'm thinking that, and unless a publisher tells me otherwise, I like the idea of doing it like that, just like saddle stitched or whatever it's called. Is that called? Is that saddle stitch where it's just like folded over and stapled? Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a little bit disposable. But at the same time, I really like the idea of releasing it like those hardcover Tintin, or like the Tim Hensley, Wally Gropius. That format's really great too. But for now, I'm just going to release. I'm just going to release a few copies. Maybe get printed covers. I don't know.
And again, we can expect this around Halloween.
Yeah.
I've read elsewhere that you're also wanting to do a history of drive-in theaters.
I do. I really want to do that.
But I'm having what's going on there?
Nothing yet. I'm having a hard time finding out a lot of information. I mean, I don't even know where to start with research material for that, really. Like, it's hard to research, to like even just to put into Google, stuff like that. 'Cause, I don't know if there's any real books written on the history of drive-ins other than like a photo history kind of thing. So I will take any information that I can get.
Yeah, I would think that there would have to be, quite a bit of information out there, books, histories, photo histories, I'm sure, yeah. But there's got to be something out there. And if any of our listeners know of such books, definitely let me and Zach know. And in fact, if people wanted to reach you directly, would they do so through your Tumblr page?
Yeah, or my email is fine also, which is just zachworton@gmail.com. Yeah, either of those two would be fine.
So Zach Worton on the look for books about drive-in theaters.
Yeah, and if anyone else has a line on I'm trying to find a copy of Hellfire by Nick Tosches. It's a book on Jerry Lee Lewis, an unflinching look at the life of Jerry Lee Lewis. Because I'm also working on another project about the sordid tales of musicians in the classic era of rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. Crime, drug abuse, all that fun stuff. I have another thing that I'm working on that's just fun stuff, and encompasses my love of comics and old music, old rock and roll, old R&B.
Now, you mentioned toward the beginning of our conversation that over the past year you felt yourself to be a little more secluded. Do you get much, or do you find much interaction with readers? Do people contact you? Do you go to cons to where you can interact with those who've read your stuff?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of cons, mainly because I have a hard time, getting there, doing it, because my job is, jobs get in the way.
Yeah.
But no, not a lot of people talk to me about stuff. Really. Occasionally, but it's rare that people write me or ask me about stuff. So,
Well, were you at TCAF this year?
I was.
Well, that's an opportunity for you to interact with your readers.
It's true, yeah. And there was a handful of really nice people that were nice to me.
See,
TCAF is great. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's
I've never been, and it's one of those that I absolutely want to go to.
If you have anxiety issues about crowds, though, you may. It's like I do. I have some anxiety about about large crowds and noise and stuff happening around. I get a little freaked out sometimes. But it's great. It's a lot of fun. Parties are good. A lot of great people. And obviously the Beguiling does a great job of putting that show on.
And I have this maybe this idealized image of the Canadian comic scene, and I know it's not monolithic. It's not like the Canadian comic scene, but just so many of the creators that I've been following over the years are Canadian, and so
and
to
a
me,
lot of them are in Ontario, like Toronto and Ontario.
So this would be like
really
a mecca.
Crazy.
Yeah,
it's great.
I love it. Yeah, well, do you feel that there is a somewhat coherent comic scene in Canada, or maybe Toronto more specifically, or is it just much more sprawled and diverse than, let's say, those of us, south of the border may realize?
It's really diverse. I mean, you've got, a lot of mainstream guys working up here. Obviously you got weirdos like DeForge and Patrick and Kuzma and Jeanette LaPalme. It's just like you've got, it runs the gamut. It's great. It's great up here. Yeah. There's not a lot of interaction between like different scenes, but it's a big scene. And as cartoonists go, a lot of talent.
Mm. Okay, so you have The Weird World of Legula Gardner coming out in October, and then a year after that, around fall of 2016, we have the next Charley Butters book. And any other smaller projects in between?
I don't know how much time I'm going to have, but I'm going to try and get some of those rock and roll stories going. Just like, there's no real set like page count. It's kind of just, if there's something that's like a page, and I might just start it as like a web thing. I don't know.
A webcomic?
Yeah, we may see if that happens. I'll just post it online maybe to start off with, just because they'll all be short, like, between 1 and 10 pages probably. So that'll happen at some point. Hopefully I'll get a couple of those out this year. Other than that, I don't think there's anything really.
Well, that does sound like plenty, though.
Yeah.
Keeping you busy. That and your job, so.
And my job, and I play in a band also, and that takes up some time. We have a record coming out in, I don't know, July, I guess.
So yeah, what's the band name?
Zorton and the Cannibals.
Zorton and the Cannibals.
Yeah. We have some stuff from our record up on our Bandcamp page, which is zortonandthecannibals.bandcamp.com.
Okay, and I can see about putting up a link in the show notes for that.
Sure, that would be great.
Yeah, as well as to your Tumblr account, which I love the name, Zach Worton's Crust Club.
Yeah, that's a tribute to the old Estrus Records singles club, which was called the Crust Club. So.
Well, Zach, thanks a lot for taking the time and talking with me today.
Well, thanks for listening to me ramble on. It was great.
I want to thank Zach Worton for taking the time and talking with me on the Comics Alternative. I've been a fan of his work for a while, ever since I picked up his first book, The Klondike, in 2011. I also want to thank Andy Brown, the publisher of Conundrum Press, for helping to arrange it. And in fact, for those of you who listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you should know by now that Conundrum Press does a lot of great books. Those that Zach Worton puts out, that's only part of it. They have many other great publications. And if you want to find great books, Conundrum Press and otherwise, then you do well to go to the website of our sponsor for this episode, which is Discount Comic Book Service. And in fact, if you go to dcbservice.com right now and do a search for Zach Worton, unfortunately, you will not find either of the Charley Butters books, but you will find his previous book, The Klondike, at a whopping 30% off of the cover price. That's probably the best deal out there. But if you do want to check out his Charley Butters books, then go to comicsalternative.com/Amazon and click on that image. That'll take you to Amazon.com, and you can pick up a copy of The Search for Charley Butters at 29% off of the cover price, and you'd be helping out the Comics Alternative by doing so. And after you do get your books at either of those places, get in touch with me and let me know what you thought of my interview with Zach Worton. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that you can leave us a voice message through SpeakPipe, which is very easy. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us, as many of you do. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media. We have a presence on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn. You can now listen to us on Spotify, and if you're an Android user, on Google Play Music. But as always, you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. We've done a lot of interviews recently, and we have more coming up, so be sure to check back with us later. Until then, take care.